Well, good evening, MOCA friends. Welcome, and then we're gonna get it started. My name is Ivan Wu. I'm translator. I'm the director of programs and chief of staff at the Museum of Chinese in America. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this insightful discussion with Dr. Melody Yunzi Li, assistant professor of Chinese Studies at the University of Houston, and author of Transpacific Cartographies, narrating the contemporary Chinese diaspora in the United States. This event will explore how contemporary Chinese diasporic narratives address the existential loss of home for immigrant communities at a time of global precarity and amid rising Sino-US tensions. So Melody will highlight cultural productions of the Chinese diaspora from the 1990s to the present day. And, without going into too much detail, after her presentation, we'll also have a panel discussion. We're actually featuring Kara Nisam, associate editor at Rutgers University. So if you do enjoy tonight's program, please consider supporting MOCA. So your generosity is vital to our institutions that will allow us to bring more programming like this to the communities. And of course, you can donate, on our website. We also accept cash and PayPal, and unfortunately Venmo, we have some issues today, but also if you'd like to purchase the book as well. Of course, after our discussion, the Q&As, we have author meet and greet and book signing. Book, it's $25. And once again, you can also purchase the book online. You can make a donation, or through Venmo, through PayPal or cash, and you can get an autographed copy, by Dr. Li. So without further ado, I will actually hand it over to Dr. Li to start the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Ivan, for your very generous introduction. And thank you all for coming, even when it's raining. I know it takes a lot to come in the rain. It doesn't rain as much in Houston. It's strange. So it fits me better here, obviously. I think I've been here often. I do want to extend my gratitude towards MOCA, and especially Ivan for organizing this talk and also giving me a chance to share my work. Also thank Nancy. I don't know if Nancy is here yet. Oh, Nancy is here. I actually did some archival work here in the archive, so that's how I get the connection here. Thank you, Nancy, for the connection. I also want to thank my acquisition editor, Kara, who generously gave her time today to share. So if you have any publication questions, this is the time, right? I also want to thank WashU Alumni Association for generously co-organizing and promoting this talk, especially Dalia here, who really promoted much and then put this on the WashU radar. You are from WashU. Wow, a lot. We're going to the rooftop bar, which will be more interesting. Oh, yeah. So if you have any question, ask Dalia about that. I also have some high school schoolmate, I believe. I don't know if they're here. And also, I see many of my friends being here. Yunzi, Ashley, Aaron, many of you, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to meeting new friends as well today. So today I'm going to share my newly published book. Well, actually not too new, but it was published earlier this year, called Transpacific Cartographies. And I feel really, really thrilled to be here today because it's my favorite city of the United States, talking about my favorite city. You can guess on my book cover, which is also on my earrings, which are the two cities featured in my book cover. Should be easy for you. Don't be shy. I need someone to raise hand. No? Manhattan and the other one? Well, yeah, half of my hometown, indeed. No one? Yes? Another metropolitan city? No, Houston is unfortunately not there. Right? No, Malaysia. Very good. Wow, actually a special gift for the winner. Okay, we are full of gifts here because I, as a teacher, educator, I need to make sure people are listening to me. Okay, so there are many gifts. Make sure you listen. So this is actually I have to point out this painting, and the painter unfortunately could not be here today. Is David Diao, who is a very famous like Hong Kong Manhattan-based artist. I was really lucky to get the permission to use his painting artwork of like Kowloon Island on one side and Manhattan on the other side, which I have personal association with, right? And of course, it's about the Trans-Pacific network that I talk about today. How does it start with all this Trans-Pacific network? I actually grew up in an overseas Chinese village in Canton, China. It was called like Overseas Chinese Village, and it was one of the earliest overseas Chinese village in China, in Canton. And my grandparents actually were overseas, like from like Vietnam, and then they came back to like China, and then they all built this village together. And this is like I went to this like primary school, also called Overseas Chinese like primary school. Then I went to Zhixing middle school. And then I went to Sun Yat-sen University, where I spent 2 years of my college time in Zhuhai. So the second question of the day, so I was actually the first cohort of School of Translation and Criticism of Sun Yat-sen University. Don't ask me when, because I don't want to expose my age. Do you know why the School of Translation and Criticism of Sun Yat-sen University was deliberately built in Zhuhai, right next to Macau? Actually, there's a hint on the page. Yes, why? Very good, very good. Okay. This is actually free in one pen that you can use on. I like it a lot. With my book title, so thanks for helping me promote. So Yongwei, as many of you know, who is the first Chinese immigrant to overseas Chinese student to the United States, finished his degree at Yale College in 1854. So his hometown is actually in Changjiawan, right next to our college. So that's when like the School of Translation and Criticism was built there. So I got more interested in overseas Chinese student body. And of course, I myself became an overseas Chinese student. I came here to WashU, like many of you. Good choice, by the way. So I became one of the overseas Chinese students as well. So I got more and more interested in the topic of overseas Chinese students and Chinese immigrants. Yet in the scholarships, like we use in Chinese American scholarships, there are largely in literary studies, there are largely studies from second or fourth generation Chinese American literature, and the ones that focus on just like the like sociology, like the history of Chinese immigrants, yet there's not much studied in between of the Chinese immigrant literature. I think it's very interesting to fill in this gap of like Chinese diaspora scholarship for on the first generation Chinese immigrants literature. So I point out these two words. So on the left, again, something about Manhattan, right? Like a lot of my friends 10 years older than me, they all told me that, well, I came to the United States because of this book. Like this book was published in the 2000s, got really popular. It's called Manhattan's Chinese Woman, talking about like how she became so successful businesswoman from China. And in fact, there was a scene that talking about pride China in the middle of Central Park and how successful she is. So it's really interesting how this book is impactful to the wave of Chinese immigrants. And versus those ones that talking about the dismythified American dream idea, like Beijinger in New York, which I will show a little bit today. This was a novel at first and became so popular and adapted into a TV series, and really talk about the debunking idea of American dream, right? Like, it's already dismythified. So this heaven and hell binary has been existing in Chinese American discourse, but the works that I study fill in this gap and then like break down the binary of the two. So I also wrote this book like in the middle of the Sino-US tension. As you know, it was never new. But when I was wrapping up the book in 2022, you could see multiple events like that increase the tension, especially with the xenophobia as one of the symptoms of the COVID-19. And this, in 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, the three Chinese American athletes, they really have this, like the Chinese government different attitudes towards their nationality, and really shows that our precarious identity of like Asian Americans, right? So that's when I feel like I want to highlight all these problems for studying new immigrant literature. And my focus is new immigrants, a term that refers to the Chinese immigrants began leaving China for the United States in the late 70s. In the Chinese literary scholarship, we often define that they emerged in the 1980s, flourished in the 1990s, and really developed and matured in 2000s. So these works that I include, like Chinese immigrant works that's written in Chinese, the Sinophone works, and also the like Anglophone work, especially Ha Jin. And my focus, like in the beginning of my talk, I mentioned is mostly related to my personal experience. Therefore, I look a lot into this idea of home. And home is also this like notion that has been played with and challenged with in Chinese American scholarship. Therefore, I like align with or use a lot of these like multiple idea, or like this idea of plural constructed sense of home, and home is in the migrant and in the diaspora. And I use like literary geography and cartography as my theoretical framework. Why? Actually has like personal connection to it as well. Well, I told you that some of my friends here are great dancers and dance scholars, like Ashley, like Yue and Yunzi. They're great dance scholars. I have not been to the dance field yet, but this is what I'm hoping to do for my next project, since I love dancing. So at the time, when I was revising my dissertation into my book, I was thinking to connect literary studies to dance to my next project. So I feel, well, the most direct way would be like the body and the space and place, right? Because we all talk like place and space a lot. So I was thinking about, well, the idea of literary geography and cartography and mapping would really be like great to connect the two. And I also really inspired by some of the mentors and like in the field, like Rob Talley, Peter Turchi, Wei Song, and many others. So I argue that these writers that I study are like the cartographers, really like remapping this sense of home for themselves in different ways. And especially Peter Turchi, the master of management, the writer as cartographer, to ask for a map is to tell you a story. So storytelling itself is really like map making. So I feel it's really powerful tool for us to think about how these diaspora writers are like map makers and making their maps that become the original maps and the geographies. Also, like a lot of the books and the books that I study also have the strong cartographic like characteristics. For instance, in Ha Jin's A Free Life, at the end, his character Nan has written a collection of poetry. When he writes to his parents, and then his imagine, he says, "I'm making a country. You must go to a country without borders, where you can build your home out of garlands of words. So here, like the writer really used this autographical figure, nan, to say that, well, country and boundary or geographical boundary is no longer like really reliable. And then we are really making a map, right, based on our art. And I'm sure many of you are artists here. And then, you know, like by the time of like while you're making all kinds of art, you're also making your map, right? But to over or beyond this geographical boundary. So I feel the mapping metaphor is really powerful in the way that I argued contemporary Chinese diasporic writers narrate their immigrant stories to those back home or in the Sinophone community around the to make sense of their experience and establish a sense of place and belonging in the world by either overlaying their exotic maps of the US on their nostalgic maps of their homeland, creating effective maps of their personal experience, or drawing some political maps in between. So the structure of the book actually like go from the from the bigger concept to the smaller ideas. So basically, I open up the questions from this idea of like what is national identities, familiar identities, and individual identities. And Ha Jin's words, a map of betrayal, they were all that and talking about like the geographical boundaries and geographical locales is not reliable place to find our home anymore. Therefore, we need to, you know, map our home through these literary work. The second chapter, like Criminal Lu Yanshi, talk about this idea of nation and family, right? Like originally in the Chinese word 国家 are closely interconnected, right? However, like during the Mao era, like the idea of is actually challenged because of the regime. Therefore, like it talks about how this family relationship is, you know, structured, restructured or challenged during the time. The third chapter focused on like some of the Sinophone new works who are which are not known in the Sinophone Chinese American literary community. They're mostly written in Chinese. These writers are more cosmopolitan writers that were able to travel back and forth, like before the COVID epidemics. And then they create a set of like effective mappings of these tourist maps that sell their experience in the United States back home. The last chapter I want to elaborate more today, talk about the two TV shows. In the end, in the coda, I also like talk about the online blogging literatures that exists and newly exists like since 2000, and especially flourished during COVID since I read my book during COVID. So I want to talk a little bit about the last chapter as an example. Each of my chapter talk about different kinds of maps that I use, like how these narratives like construct new kinds of maps. So the last chapter, I use the idea of palimpsest. If any of you have seen palimpsest, anyone has a definition of palimpsest? No?
Something that's written over in erased text or erased text was previously.
Yes, right. So you guys have to. Great. So this palimpsest is, you know, in the old manuscripts, right? Like he mentioned, you know, it's written over, but you see the hints of the old manuscript, old text. So it's like there are hints of the old, but then there are new on top of each layer. So I really like this idea because it tear up the like. I feel that these shows, if you see them, you can see like. By the way, if you haven't visited the museum, it's wonderful. It talked a lot about the American dream idea in the like 1950s, like in the 1840s, 1870s, and in the time that like the American dream on the West Coast and all these challenges that early Chinese Americans and labor workers face. And you saw that as the original American dream landscape. However, these new shows, they tear up that surface, but you still see the new lived experience of that. So it's like the palimpsest. you see these traces of the like old American dream idea, but then on top there's this new American dream ideas. So I argue that like Beijing and New York, for instance, retooled the map of American dream to be more uncertain, while layering on top of the old immigrants map of American dream, while the other show redraws the map of the Chinese dream to be more personal than political, while laying on top. So we could see a little bit, since we are in New York, I think it's really fitting right, to wherever they are in the basement apartment. This like, what's the song? Uh-huh. Such a shy crowd. This is the so like when it was what is, so it makes a really contrast with this scene when they just like came into this basement apartment. Well, I don't think we'll finish seeing this whole scene, but you could see they just like it's a very slow motion of like them looking at the basement apartment. It's not exactly what they're thinking about. So this like really good contrast of the American dream and debunking American dreams image, right? So it's very like in the show there are a lot of those like contrasted image that showing. So like for instance, like this scene first show the landscape of whole Manhattan, like have the long shot, then zoom in to have the to show her disappointed look on the other side, really highlighting the distance between her and her imagined American dream idea. Like the other one, you can see the focus point is on these like tons of mountains of bowls that never finished. As he was original famous shallow player in China, but then he came to be a like labor worker, a restaurant worker. So like this, as we are probably very familiar with a lot of the works that paints New York and America as a palimpsestic map, with the old map depicts American dream as the material construct. Beijinger in New York demystifies and disconstructs it and constructs New York as the in-between spaces of the heaven, neither hell or nor heaven, both or none. So really complicates this idea. And then we see traces of the indenture when the American dream are scratched, destroyed, and undone. The other show like that's produced 20 years later, 归去来. So the title return, actually taking the title 归去来西田园江湖, a famous poem in Dongxing. So it implies a strong promotion of returning to homeland. So the show is like, oh, maybe this is government promotion of people going back to China, right? But when I saw it many times, that I feel there is this another new layer of it because it has this emotional, affectionate, and interpersonal trajectory that suggests a possible return that not just based on this national American, like Chinese dream, but that personal dream that's possible, a new possibility. So in general, my whole book like really talks about these diaspora narratives that constructs different kinds of maps that really debunk this idea of like the sense of home based on geographical locale. Instead, thinking about beyond this geographical locale, like we can create a home. These literary words create a sense of home that's beyond this nation, home, the boundary. So, and these maps are not the static map, right? That define what's right. I'm not good with the static map either. Actually, bad with geographical locations. So I want to study these literary maps, and these Transpacific maps really are maps that culturing or like really contouring this maps and constructing these maps that over highlighting the Trans-Pacific and transnational flows. So I think like I will just share my part here today, and then I hope wherever you are and whatever you do, whatever art you do, you are creating Trans-Pacific cartographies. Thank you.
So next we'll have editors from Brothers, and then Kara Nassim, to give us kind of overview of publishing and then the work she's been doing. Yeah.
Hey everybody. Sorry, I didn't realize I was going to be kind of standing up in the middle, so I'll just do my best. My name is Kara Nassim. I'm an acquiring editor, I'm associate editor at Rutgers University Press. I acquire books in Asian diasporic studies, as well as religious studies and Jewish studies. And I started back in 2022. Started over here. Right. I started back in 2022 at Rutgers as an assistant editor. And as an assistant editor, my sole acquisitions priority at that time, in addition to assisting our editorial director, was in Asian American studies. So as an Asian American person, I was very excited to connect with the field of Asian American studies. And one of the first books that I worked on was Melody's book. I can't take the credit for acquiring the book. That would be been my predecessor, Jasper, who really saw something about Melody's work and put the book into the press. I had the rare opportunity to come in and become acquainted with Melody and her work, support her book kind of in the latter stages of its process, and to send it along for production. Melody's book, alongside a couple of other books that I was working on as an editor in Asian American Studies, really had me start to think about what I was really doing here at the press. For my acquisitions priorities, what are the acquisitions priorities at the press so far? Meaning, when I say acquisitions priorities, I mean, what kind of books do we want to publish, and in the various fields that we publish in. And Rutgers also publishes in anthropology and sociology, Latin American studies, lots of different types of fields. So Melody's book actually belongs to what's called a book series at the press called Asian American Studies Today. I have a series editor who's a scholar named Dr. Hu-Ping Ling. She's a professor emerita at Truman State. She's an historian of Chinese in America. And Melody's book was going to be the next addition to this series. And so it was exciting for me. Actually, one of the main things that I connected to Melody's book was that I'm a big nerd, and I was a geography major in school. And so this idea about geography and cartographies like really clicked with me, and it made me feel really engaged at an early stage about, okay, what is she saying about literary geographies? And so one of the things that I was working on with Melody, kind of the last stages of the book are really interesting because the whole book is written, and then there's a bunch of small processes that need to happen in order to make the book ready for production. And one of those things is talking about the cover image. And so Melody showed the cover image and explained the cover image that it's a painting by David Diao, which I think was a beautiful idea that Melody came up with, but it was after actually a long discussion about what we want to have covered. And one of the earlier ideas was kind of this big map, a big global map with lots of connections. And this is like lighting up my brain as a fake bachelor in geography. And thinking about Asian American studies, and I went to my first Asian American Studies conference and met many scholars in Asian American Studies for the first time, and talking with Melody and a number of other scholars, and I had a thought that I was compelled about the idea about thinking about diaspora. And Melody's book is about cartographies and about diaspora. And I thought to myself, as I was looking through the list and meeting other scholars, that I wanted to make more room for discussion about diaspora, to preserve Asian American studies at Rutgers University Press, because Asian American studies has its own genealogy as a field emerging in the United States. Also that there are really curious and interesting things happening, led by scholars such as Melody, who are scholars from Asia coming into the United States, or from really anybody in various fields, that there's interesting things happening kind of at the intersections of Asian studies, Asian cultural studies, and Asian American studies, and the ways in which people are kind of looking at each other across space and looking at each other across time and trying to create new field formations and scholarship. So this is where now, 2 years later at Rutgers University Press, I find myself now, I'm an associate editor acquiring an Asian diasporic studies. And the reason that I made this shift was to kind of try to make a larger umbrella at Rutgers University Press to encapsulate what I see as like a more complex set of experience, not that Asian American studies is not complex, is not what I'm trying to say, but that there is a growing conversation because the Asian community, the Asian American community, and the Asian diaspora community is a community with complex histories, layered migrations and histories, and one that I wanted to kind of make more space at the press to have those conversations. And so I wanted to just come here and tell you all about that. And so thank Melody for being a key inspiration in thinking about diaspora, geography, movement, culture, and people, and the complexities of their experience, and to make that as like a core priority for Asian American studies and Asian diasporic studies at Rutgers University. And I'm blessed to be an East Coast press that's really rooted and embedded in Asian American communities and histories in New Jersey and Central Jersey. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. So I don't want to speak long because I know there's going to be also a Q&A. We'll have more opportunity to talk. I really just want to kind of say those things to you. These are some of our recent titles in Asian American Studies, Asian diasporic studies. There's a variety of sociology, medical anthropology, media studies, and there's a QR code. So if you're an interested reader, you should snap a picture and just take a look at our catalog and see if there's anything you're interested in. And if you're an interested scholar, then you should come and say hello and we can talk about that. So that's really it. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Melody for having me here. It's a blessing to be here. It's in New York. Melody is going all over the place all the time, talking to her about her book, and she's doing an excellent job. And to be in New York is, and she's in New York, we like to get together. And it's a blessing to be here at MOCA. And so thank you for MOCA. Thank you to MOCA, and thank you to Khan also for helping organize the event. And I look forward to support. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, I forgot to mention, so if you're interested in more podcasts, like reviews and anything, it's all on my link tree. So you can just scan the QR code.
Thank you so much, for the talk. I mean, also I will keep it, sort of brief because, we'll probably have some questions from the audience, and also online participants, feel free to submit questions, during our conversation, and then, and then we can, through those questions of this. Once again, thank you so much, and I always kind of, start by asking, why this book, like what inspired you to do research, given your backgrounds, can you just, share a little bit more, who are unfamiliar, with your research?
I think I've spoken about my personal experience, like, growing up as in the overseas Chinese village, and then later on, have been part of the overseas Chinese students. I felt like, well, this seems to be insufficient in the Chinese literary scholarships. So I just feel like, well, we are such a big part of China, like overseas Chinese community, overseas Chinese student community, and I want to study more. And I also have connections in like New York, for instance, has a big North America Chinese writers group, and know some are online. So thank you so much. I know Rao Lei is one of the famous writers. I also been on some of their talks, and it's very interesting to me that how much they create, and it's not so much studied in the scholarship. So I feel like a strong mission to really portray and promote their works. So that's also a big reason to start on this topic.
And also, and also, as you mentioned in your presentation, there were specific novels and TV shows that you chose. I'm just curious, that what make them kind of particularly sort of significant, to just did you watch them growing up, or were they the only kind of novels or TV shows kind of addressing sort of the diasporic Sinophone diasporic kind of experience at the time since the 1990s? Yeah.
That's $1 million question. Since we don't make that much as literary scholars, so I can't answer that. It's very interesting, and I don't know if I can completely address that, but I just, there are different reasons for different choice. So Ha Jin I'm actually one of the first scholars to study Ha Jin. I studied him since master's student, and I first studied the translation that happens in his works, which is very interesting. As you know, Ha Jin is very famous for exoticism and defamiliarization in his works of like being Chinese-ness, right? So I was interested in how it was back translated. So later on, I got to know the writer and actually read more of his works. But his work, particularly A Free Life and a Map of Betrayal that I studied in this book, was the key inspiration for my work, because a map of betrayal really have this kind of maps. That's how a spy, a Chinese American spy, was double spied, but like he was betrayed by both countries, but he's also betraying both countries, and he was betrayed by himself. So I think this, there's so much complication about this mapping metaphor in his work. So I was very inspired by his work. So very much like you say, like a strong connection to cartography and geographies. But later on, I feel like, oh, I want to see different works that's portraying like the family relationship. So like that's what the second chapter about, and the third chapter is about intimate, affectionate relationship. And then lastly, I feel like, well, I watch a lot of movies and TV shows, so I had to use some of that, and I feel like the cinematic geographies and cartographies interest me a lot. So that's the when it's developed.
Yeah, thank you. On my next question, because you also mentioned about, in your book about the Chinese diasporic writers, that particular community. And then, I remember you mentioned, specifically the ones living here in the United States, right? Kind of feeling sort of this sense of in-betweenness, right? Kind of, sort of the story, like some of even when, they publish their work, right? Even the Chinese, writers will kind of reject them. Also, they don't fit into the American literature landscape. And then I'm just curious, kind of like in terms of people who aren't familiar with sort of the Chinese diaspora writers community here in the United States, can you just share more, like how many of you are out there, or in terms just in a general idea? I know that we're going to go into kind of you mentioned more kind of this online, right? Checking the kind of the online literature kind of map, right? Sort of during the pandemic. Maybe first, kind of, can you introduce, that community to us? Yeah.
Curious, how many of you are writers here? Anyone? Great. Well, we have quite a bit here. So yeah, get to promote their works, right? So New York has a big community. So like there are two types that mainly, right? Like some writes in Anglophone writing. So like English writers like Ha Jin, like Shi Yu and those, right? And there are like a lot of new writers as well. They've been very famous, especially as the sci-fi writers lately. They're doing like, PhD works at Yale and all that. I dare say I have to catch up in terms of those new writers. The others, like the Chinese diaspora writers, like they have a lot of local communities, right? Like New York has a big one. And then like Seattle, all the big cities have their own group, right? Houston have one, Seattle has one, Boston has one, like all these big cities, Chicago has one. So all these big cities really have their own community, and there are also like big associations across the United States, like北美作家协会, right? Like the North America, like Chinese American Association, and there are also websites that they publish, and lately WeChat platforms, right? So I think all these online platforms also enable all to publish their work. So I would say they're really a lot, right? And then I feel like writing is no longer like a list in that way, right? It's really becoming something that really for us to claim or recreate our identity.
And then I think now kind of we can go into sort of, we talk about WeChat, Weibo, right? I think, definitely, of course, for a while, right, we consider, sort of real writing is like in print academia, right? But people do kind of right now, especially in the pandemic, treat something like, Weibo, WeChat as sort of a self-publishing, kind of still. But can you actually talk more in terms of, when during the pandemic, right, experience, like when the whole world was closed, especially in China, even in the US, how did those writers navigate, kind of the, their writing practice, but also what did they publish, kind of just also, how did they also survive, the pandemic, if I may.
Yeah. Actually, it's very interesting. I would say like there's so much out there during COVID that I would not like be able to encompass everything. Maybe like some in the attendance can compliment more on that part. But as I know, what is like why do I not have to write about Chinese American internet writing? Is that many actually didn't know that like the Chinese American writings online is the earliest, it's the pioneer in online writing in Sino in the whole world. It's before like online writing became big or became like even existed in China. So China nowadays has like big online platform writing. Like they got so much commercialized, right? They gain a lot of money through it. But in the early 80s, actually the very first like pioneer like that creates these online writings started in the United States. And the ones who started some of the platforms in China, the early platforms in online writing in China actually were overseas from the US, going back to China to create that in the 90s. And then they became really big and commercialized later on in the 2000s. The US could not catch up and everyone just paying attention to the China platform. And I think like to me, the COVID actually reversed that trend a little bit again, because really having us like realize, well, all these are transnational flows and networks, right? Like it doesn't matter where they are, because a lot of the diasporic like used to being able to travel back and forth. Right now, they might be stuck at wherever they are, or they travel to a country and could not get out. But they really could create their identity and connect to home through writing. And this is maybe one of their only ways. So it becomes like really a way of existence. So like, by the time of writing these Transpacific writers, I think it's really interesting for me to rethink this idea of diaspora, right? Like nowadays, diaspora is no longer like where we leave out homeland and become diaspora, that like the original definition. Because during COVID, in a sense, everyone is diasporic, right? You're really like away from home, or in the sense that even you're stuck on these Zooms, you're exiled, right? So the sense of isolation and diaspora become more and more like unique and important experience for everyone to learn. So I do think that's very important issue I want to explore more.
I assume, imagine even now post-pandemic, right? Writers like you, even others, right, that were stuck, still now be able to sort of once again freely through countries, through borders, but also still once again continue using the online platform, right, to to because I guess before you, because I personally, as I was reading the book, I was so fascinated by an idea that you call the liminal space, like came from the Latin word limen, right? And then you talk about that's when we exist kind of in a liminal space, that's when transformations are generated. Yeah. Can you elaborate on that for people who aren't familiar with that concept? Yeah.
First, thanks so much for reading so carefully. I gave some copies to my student and I test them. I know they haven't read. So I'm so touched whenever someone can point out so specifics, right? That's how you know they're friends. But liminal space is actually a concept I started using in dance hall. As I mentioned, like one of the reasons I want to write about literary cartographies or geographies is because I really love dancing. Even though I never become a great dancer like some of my friends here, like Yao and Yunzi, they actually teach dancing in the city. So if you're interested, you should take or send a kid to the classes. Shy. And so like when I wrote paper on the San Francisco nightclub, which I used the idea of like the liminal space of this like transitional space, I was really captivated by this idea of like this transitional space, right? Because it's in betweenness, like you say, right? So this idea of the in betweenness, and then how you really transition into this space, but you'll never be there. So that's that of these like, Chinese American identities. And therefore, I feel like this is really fitting for this kind of like Chinese American identities, no matter it's in dance or in like the writing.
And I just have to be honest, yeah, because I was reading, your book. It's like, to me, it's pandemic. It's to me it's also therapeutic. It's like that's why I want to recommend for people, really. That's why it's kind of the new scholarship, right? It's what makes it interesting. I think the next question actually will be for both of you, so then we can kind of and then wrap up the discussion, so I can open the floor for Q&A. So really, as we know, right, sometimes academia kind of, especially in scholarships, respond maybe slowly to certain cultural or social movements, right? But in your eyes, in your opinions, what do you see the role of academia kind of in engaging with broader community issues, right? Like the social movements, and I guess I'm just curious, what's the role of academia played? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I think about this a lot as an editor. The acquiring editors are among many gatekeepers for academics, right? And we just have to be honest, like that is the position that you're in as an editor. But for me, from the very beginning, and so I come from like that social movement background, and that's important to me. Has always been important in scholarship for me. And I always want to bring that into my acquisitions priorities. But as Yifan said, the academy and the presses that, work in tandem with the academy, they are slow moving. They're conservative. They're institutions. That's institutions. They just move, and there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of things that go along with making a book happen. So for me, it takes a lot of energy to try to move in countercurrent with those processes that would say this isn't quite rigorous enough, or this isn't quite what we're looking for in a project. I think it requires conscious effort to combat the kinds of conservatisms that you find in the academy. For me, I tried to think instead of being a gatekeeper with the door closed, I went in there and I said, I'm just going to open the door to as many people as possible. That's what we're trying to do. For me, I'm like, how can I try to get younger scholars doing cutting edge work, book contracts, right? It's everybody needs to get a job, and the book contract is a way to a job, and it's also a way to get people's scholarship out there. So for me, that's really important because I really see that the future of the academy is in the and the people who are struggling. They're in their like fourth postdoc and they're writing their book. They're in the process of converting their dissertation, and what they have to say is really important. And also, the world is moving quick at the same time as they are trying to wrap this thing up and turn it into a book. And I think that that's the process that I think that a lot of young scholars have to go through in order to like get to where they want to be, to feel more stable and talk more and go on to their second and third and fourth book. So for me, that's where I see the future of publishing is in younger scholars. I mean, this is kind of a trope, right? The future is in the young people or whatever. But I mean, it's it is true. And for those people who they want to have cutting edge and critical scholarship, they have to meet book editors, and so they have to meet me and others like me. There's also like a young cohort of editors coming in who have similar ways of thinking, and so for me, I see this kind of thing as a collaboration for making the kind of world that we want to see, make the kind of politics and scholarship and cultural productions that we want to see. That kind of just can increase the conversations we have among one another and increase understanding and support one another in our lives and our struggle. Melody.
I guess I would just keep it brief, but don't ask me about it. I'm in taxes. That's a tough question, right? But yeah, I guess, I have like exactly that challenge of like, institutional struggle, like moving slow, very slow. I host a lot of events at UH, and then every single steps had to be so difficult and so many forums and stuff. So I really feel the challenge. I have to say I'm very lucky to be able to work with Kara and Rutgers. Like it was really smooth process. And actually, faster than expected. So I think for that, I was really grateful. And then, I would use like Ha Jin's words, like he said, writing is his way to return home, is his way to create a map. He created identity. So I think like for me, it's also therapeutic. Like you say, therapeutic to read these writers because like they are the examples for me and like all Chinese diasporic scholars like us to create that door or open that door to try to navigate like these paths.
Thank you. And then, and I know in your kind of slideshow that you kind of showed, what some of the, topics of recent, acquisitions. But also, I guess just also for the young scholars, people who are interested in Asian and Asian American diasporic studies, what are some of the emerging themes or, what's re-emerging, themes, that like, like kind of really in recent years, really currently that you would, kind of, actually encourage people to go into don't because sometimes when I think as young scholars we're like afraid what if it's too niche am I really kind of people gonna read it right am I thinking of yeah once again it's kind of your like what do I contribute to the some discourse yeah any advice
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. So if you have an idea, it's probably a good one. There's so many things. So I mean, there's lots of publishers and they're all interested in different things. And so like part of the thing is kind of trying to find the publisher that is saying some things that you're interested. One bit of advice is like look at your bookshelf, right? That's always a good one. Is like whoever you're reading and really engaging with, that might be a good idea for you. You can talk to those folks, right? For me personally, I'm really excited by, I'm really excited by queer and trans studies, global queer and trans studies. I'm really excited about art. And like increasingly, I'm gonna have like a more of a performance turn and just try and bring everybody along with that. It's a good idea for you, Melly. I keep saying I am interested in the idea about dance. I'm not just saying to you. I was at Asian American Studies recently trying to talk to some dance scholars. We're going to dance at Asian American Studies. There are people doing, and I'm kind of trying to talk to them a little bit. Other publishers really have that, but I'm just wondering if maybe people would be interested in talking to Rutgers about that. I'm interested in ecological critique and like decoloniality generally. I mean, I'm also interested in crossing over lists, people talking about religion, Asian Americans in religion. I'm interested in this idea. I'm interested also in like labor and like other kinds of like labor histories. A project that I'm working on is about Chinese LGBTQ organizing, and like this really rings a bunch of bells in my head. Like check. So and I'm interested in other like less exciting things too. History, quad history. I mean, I really like history, so history, quad history. Some things about food. We're always doing things about food at Rutgers. And I'm always interested in your project about food. There can't ever be enough about that. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, I mean, so for those listening carefully, those are some of the things that I'm interested in personally. But yeah, in terms of my advice, look at your bookshelf. Who are you reading? That might be one of the presses that you might be interested in. And so readers, there are readers for whatever you want to do. It's the press's job to like adequately market your book. So just write that down. And that's the goal for us too, as people work in publishing, is to curate a collection of scholars and scholarships that we can then talk about them as and kind of market them together in a way. Is like these are all the folks over here with us having a conversation about queerness, or having a conversation about decolonial critique, or about Asian American religion, or whatever the many other things that I said. And so it's about like joining that conversation. You as a singular scholar individual can say a lot, but when you get your book published, you join a discourse of other scholars kind of all having a discussion in space, and so that's part of the collaboration with presses and with academic presses and trade presses too. If your thing is creative writing or poetry, is that you kind of join into a larger discourse. And so if we can talk about it in such a way together, we understand that we're creating a discourse, then you enter into a community and you're not so alone. Very good.
What about you, Melody? What advice would you give, or encourage people, to go into the future?
Yeah, actually what Kara said, like, looking at the bookshelves is very helpful, because I got a lot of advice like that. I think in the early stage, like, because you are entering a conversation, I think this is what literature, when we do literature review, that's what we do, right? Like, so to read the books in our field. So to look at those, like, those titles and what you're interested in and create your unique voice within it, is very interesting and very useful.
Okay, so I do want to, save the rest of the time for Q&A. So if you do have a questions, please raise your hand. I will come over so then you can speak to the microphone so that our online audience can hear you. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. This is Esther. Thank you for your wonderful introduction of the new book. So I have two questions. One is, how long does it take you to write this book, including research and formal writing? And another one is, which TV shows or movie or book is your favorite? And another question is for Carol. Could you tell me more about the details of how to publish your book in US? Because I'm a literature, I like literature and I'm writing now, so I want to get some information about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Esther. I think Esther lives in Houston, right?
Yeah.
Good to see you again here. Yeah, so for, like, that's maybe a little embarrassing about how long, because every academic would say it takes so long to write a book. So this is based on my dissertation, which takes like 3-4 years, like from the dissertation stage. And then it took me about 2 years to revise everything, 2 to 3 years. And then for the whole process of publication, actually it's very short. Like I say, it's very smooth, as even faster than I expected, but that takes probably another 2 years, like for the whole process from, like having the contract and submitting the submit. But once I submit my final manuscript to the publication, it only takes 1 year. So I think it's faster than a lot of what my colleagues say with other presses. So that was really amazing.
Thanks, Esther, for your question. I'm glad to hear that you're writing and that you're thinking about getting your writing published. So I have never worked in fiction publishing. So I'll say that I'm not sure what kind of writing you do, or poetry, but I have some friends who are literary agents and who work in fiction publishing, so I can speak a little bit about that and briefly, and then also about academic publishing, because they're quite different. My sense is that literary editors who look at fiction and poetry get volumes and volumes and many submissions. So it can sometimes be difficult, I think, to get some of your work in front of an editor, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. I think a lot of folks, they often try to work with agents. It's one of those things. Agents do have connections with big literary publishers, and they can try. I'm not for or against agents. One of my best friends is an agent. Sometimes I work with agents. So it's one thing that you can do. The real thing is like perseverance. If you write fiction and poetry, to like get it in front of an editor. Sometimes self-publishing small things can work, or like publishing in a small independent house. If you're looking to ultimately get a Random House deal or a Norton deal or something like that, you have like a track record in publishing, self-publishing, and then you can kind of build your way towards it. I myself, when I was younger, published a small bits of poetry or whatever, so they follow me around. People kind of still know, even though I don't do that anymore. But it exists in the world if you put it out yourself. Academic publishing is really different. If you're writing an academic publisher, our information is online at our university press site, and you can just email us. And the best thing to do is just email, ideally with a proposal. So I brought them with me, and I can give you one if you want a proposal guidelines. Because I thought maybe someone will ask me. But the key thing for an academic book is to come with your idea and to come with a proposal. And academic editors, they just don't get as much of a huge volume of submissions. And my experience is that academic editors, they really spend some time looking through the proposals and thinking. And it's not that the trade editors don't, but they just get so much more material that they have choosing. So depending on what you're doing, the key thing is, yeah, just getting in touch with an editor. And we can talk more if you have specific, like more specific things, but those would be the like bits of advice that I can give.
Talk more about the favorite works because that would take a while.
Oh yeah.
Hi, thank you for writing this book and giving the talk. If I could maybe make one comment and then ask a question. Speaking of geography, Houston's the third largest city in America, and it's got a tremendously large Asian American population. So I think of it sitting here in Europe as the new and exciting, and us as kind of the old. And it's still exciting, but the old. My question is about maybe something a little bit older. I know you talk about the writer Li Yu, and you sort of differentiate, why you can focus on her because of maybe their focus on the nation state. But her sort of concept of the rootless generation, to me, speaks directly to a lot of themes that you're writing about. And if I might challenge you a little bit to say that that was the missed opportunity to connect that to that book that she wrote in 1967, which is sadly only really in Chinese, right? That talked about all the themes that you're talking about in your book. So
Yes, exactly. Thanks for mentioning that. I actually had that in my dissertation. If you want to go look. So I had a chapter in my dissertation originally was comparing the 1960s to 70s to the contemporary Chinese diaspora. And there was nothing about like literature geography then, but it's comparing the sense of like the notion of home in those overseas Chinese student writings to the new Chinese student writing. And those ones, like I find it, like you say, yeah, it's very connected, especially like the nation, like their sense of nation, like connected to the sense of home. But later on, because I wanted it to all have the same geographical, like and also historical background of these writers coming from mainland China. So that's why this current book like mainly focused on those Xing Yi in the Chinese literary scope. But thanks for the question, and I definitely need to publish that paper somewhere too.
Any more questions from the audience? Sure.
Thank you for the talk. It was really interesting, and I kind of following up on what you're saying when you're comparing kind of over time the Chinese diaspora. If you could talk a little bit about how technology, right, has made the world much smaller and it shapes the experience of diaspora. Do you see that?
Thanks, Amy, for this wonderful question. I think it should be the next book. Right? Technology reshapes Chinese diaspora. I could not say like too much about it right now, but one thing that in those like literary writing that I mentioned is those online writings that I just finished up with in my coda, where it does talk about like how technology really changed the scope of diaspora, right? Like the one like that the one's original diaspora may not be diaspora anymore, whereas the diasporic like could also easily connect to home. So this idea of home and diaspora already like, really mixed up, and this sense of diaspora and the notion already developed. Like I do think technology really plays a big part, an important, most crucial part, probably if not all, in the changing notion of diaspora. Thank you.
Any more questions? Let me check if anything online. No, actually, yep. I think we're good. So then maybe, can we give, before we, go into the signing, can we give a round of applause, for that? Okay, and then, so any last words? Okay, you mentioned you want to talk about a word or something,
You haven't read enough, like, all my contact information is there and the link tree to the book. And then I look forward to talking to you more.